The train was crowded that chilly winter morning. People huddled close, trying to stay warm. Outside, frost coated the windows, and the early light barely peeked through gray clouds. Melanie stepped onto the train, her boots clicking softly on the floor. She wore a thick, stylish coat, and carried a leather handbag. Her headphones were already in, playing music only she could hear. She moved quickly through the packed car, searching for a seat. Finally, she found one in the priority section, a place usually saved for elderly, pregnant, or disabled passengers. Melanie sat down, without a glance at those around her. Her eyes stayed glued to her phone, scrolling through messages. At the other end of the car, an elderly man slowly climbed the steps. He was in his mid-70s, with silver hair and deep lines on his face. Though frail, he stood tall, holding firmly to a metal pole. His clothes were simple but clean, and there was a quiet dignity about him. The man looked around, hoping someone would offer him a seat. But the train was crowded, and people avoided eye contact. Some pretended not to notice. The old man remained standing, steady but tired. Melanie didn't look up. She stayed focused on her phone, unaware, or maybe unwilling, to give up her seat. The elderly man took a small step closer to Melanie's seat. His voice was soft but polite as he said, "Excuse me, may I sit here?" Melanie glanced up for a moment, her eyes narrowing. She pulled one headphone out and replied, "If you can't stand, maybe you shouldn't be on the train during rush hour." Her tone was sharp, like she didn't want to be bothered. Some passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. A young mother with a toddler looked at Melanie, then at the old man, her lips pressed tight. The elderly man didn't argue. He looked down at his worn shoes and took a small step back. The train rattled along the tracks, the sound filling the silence between them. "People your age should stay home," Melanie added, shaking her head as if the idea was obvious. She slid her phone back into her pocket and turned away. The man stood quietly, gripping the pole. His eyes scanned the crowded car. No one else offered a seat. The mother beside him tried to say something, maybe to help, but the words caught in her throat. Around them, the train car was filled with tired faces. Some avoided the scene, others stared but didn't move. The cold air inside felt heavier. Melanie leaned back in her seat, headphones back on, music drowning out the noise. The elderly man remained standing, patient, steady, and alone. A small boy sitting nearby looked curiously at the elderly man's hands. They were rough and covered with faint scars, the kind only years of hard work and tough days could leave. His fingers trembled slightly as they held the metal pole. "Looks like he's been through a lot," whispered a man standing close by. The boy leaned closer, eyes wide. "Maybe he was a soldier," he said quietly. The old man didn't say a word, but his eyes grew distant for a moment. In his coat pocket, hidden beneath his scarf, he touched something small and cold, a medal with the word Valor etched faintly on its surface. Wrapped around it was a delicate chain, the necklace his late wife had given him years ago. Memories flickered behind his eyes like old film, boots sinking into sandy earth, loud explosions, friends calling his name over the roar of battle. He had fought in a faraway land, so people could have the freedom to ride this train without fear. The train rattled on, shaking him slightly. He clenched his jaw and looked back at the crowded car, filled with people who didn't know his story. The weight of those silent years pressed on his shoulders, heavier than the cold outside. The boy watched him closely, sensing something beyond the man's quiet sadness. The train jolted suddenly, and Melanie nearly lost her balance. She stumbled forward, bumping lightly into the elderly man standing beside her. "Watch it, Grandpa," she snapped, her voice sharp and impatient. The car fell silent. All eyes turned toward the old man, waiting for his reply. He looked up slowly, his face calm but firm. Then in a quiet voice that carried through the stillness, he said one word, "Valor." The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning. A teenager sitting nearby frowned. "What does that mean?" he asked softly. The old man's eyes softened. "Valor was my unit," he explained. We fought to protect this country, so people like her could sit freely and safely on this train. The passengers looked at Melanie, who suddenly felt the weight of the room. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. No one said a word, but the mood had shifted. For the first time, Melanie's music faded from her ears. The meaning behind that single word was clear: a lifetime of courage, sacrifice, and honor. The old man stood a little straighter, his shoulders squared, as if the word itself gave him strength. Around them, a quiet respect began to grow, a respect that needed no argument or loud voice, only the truth. Just as the quiet respect began to settle over the car, a man in his early 40s suddenly stood up. He was tall, wearing a worn jacket, and carrying a briefcase. His eyes were wide with surprise, and something like recognition. "Sir," the man said, his voice steady but full of emotion, "were you really part of Valor Company?" The old man nodded slowly, a small flicker of surprise crossing his face. "My grandfather was in Valor too," the man continued. "Ethan Rivers, you knew him?" The elderly man's eyes glistened. "Ethan Rivers was my closest friend," he replied quietly. Without hesitation, the man took off his coat and offered his seat to the old veteran. "Please, have this seat," he said respectfully, lowering himself to stand. Melanie looked between them, suddenly feeling small and out of place. She tried to make a joke, hoping to break the tension. "Well, guess you got some fans after all," she muttered, but no one laughed. The passengers around them began to clap softly, some nodding in agreement, others whispering words of thanks. The stranger gave the old man a gentle salute, a small but powerful gesture that made the entire car feel like it held its breath. The old man accepted the seat with a quiet nod, the warmth of the moment softening the cold in the air. For the first time since boarding, the train car felt like a community, bound by respect, honor, and shared stories. Melanie shifted in her seat, her cheeks burning with shame. She looked down at her hands, suddenly feeling small and out of place in the quiet respect filling the car. I didn't know," she said softly, barely above a whisper. The elderly man looked at her with kind but tired eyes. He nodded slowly, but said nothing. His silence spoke louder than any words. From his coat pocket, he carefully pulled out an old faded photo. It showed a young couple smiling in front of a military base. A woman's hand was resting gently on the man's shoulder. The photo was worn, the edges soft with time. A little girl sitting nearby leaned closer and whispered, "My grandpa was in the army too." The old man smiled gently, the first real smile since the train ride began. "Then he was my brother," he said quietly. Melanie stayed silent, realizing this wasn't about her anymore. The moment belonged to the man, to the memories, and to all those who had sacrificed for others. The passengers looked at Melanie with understanding but no anger. They knew people made mistakes, but respect, true respect, was earned and shared. Melanie took off her headphones, turned off her phone, and for the first time truly listened. The train slowed as it approached the next station. Melanie stood up quietly, and walked toward the door, her head lowered, avoiding the eyes of the other passengers. She stepped off the train, without a word. Inside the car, the atmosphere was calm, but changed. People moved aside respectfully, as the elderly man stood and began to make his way toward the exit. The man who had offered his seat walked beside him, matching his slow pace. A young child near the door waved happily, and called out, "Thank you for your service." The old man looked down and smiled gently, his eyes shining with quiet pride. As the doors slid open, the cold morning air met them. The old man paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and then stepped out into the winter light. The train began to move again, carrying the passengers forward. The narrator's voice said softly, "Some people earn respect through their actions. Others learn what respect truly means, sometimes the hard way." The screen faded to black, leaving a feeling of hope, honor, and quiet justice.